Hello there, friends. Welcome to another episode of Brown Bags and Bibles. I'm Scott Wakefield, lead pastor at First Christian Church of Greene County, joined as always by...
I'm Mark Liebert. I'm one of the elders serving with Scott and his partner for all things Brown Bags and Bibles.
And this is part 2 of 10 in our second section. The first section was the world religions.
Yes.
This is new religious movements.
Right. Again, we're using Dr. Derek Cooper's book, which I'm holding. Hopefully the camera is showing it to you. A great resource to get. But this will be our material we're using for our content. It's the structure and the outline of what we do. It's set up very similar to his other book. Very, very helpful. And Scott, you pointed out this is new.
Yeah, 2023.
2023. So very helpful. Christianity and New Religious Movements, Derek Cooper.
And this all comes under I think 2. The last one was Jainism. This is Sikhism. The 2 that come under Hindu new religious movements.
Right. Coming out of Hinduism.
2. Yes, 2. Jainism and Sikhism.
Right.
I always heard Sikhism, S-I-K-H. I have heard people say Sikh.
And he actually points that out. He says S-I-K-H comes from the Punjabi language, where I is a short vowel.
So it's Sikhism.
So he says technically it should be Sikhism.
But you hear Sikhism
most
because
of the time. Sikhism sounds like in
strange.
English something
it sounds
wrong.
Super strange, yes.
That's probably why we say Sikhism.
I believe in always being
ill.
Ill, yes.
Yeah.
All right. So if Jainism is the story of nonviolence, Sikhism is the story of union.
Yeah.
We'll get there, of course, but that's how he categorizes those 2 new religious movements from Hinduism.
Yes.
And they are not a cult or a sect. Those are bad old terms. That's a new world religion.
Yes. New world religion. That's right. So, again, I said Punjabi language. Punjab, this is important to know. Sikhism originated in the region of the world called Punjab, which today is eastern Pakistan and northern India.
Which is very different than southern or the rest of India, for sure.
Yeah. So if you remember from world history, in 1947...
I do, of course.
Britain split Punjab into eastern Pakistan and into India.
I vaguely remember that, yes.
Right. So in response, since the Sikhs lived in that area, most of them moved to North India, and most of the Muslims moved out to Pakistan, which is why Pakistan today is Muslim, and India is much more Hindu.
Yes, that's good.
That should strike a chord with people.
Yeah.
So more than 90%...
It should, because we all learned that.
More than 90% of Sikhs are in India today, but there are some large groups in the UK, in the US, and Canada.
Yeah, and there are a lot of them. There are 25 million
Yes. Yeah. And how do you recognize them? This is the thing. People will, once I say this, they'll get it.
Yeah, turbans and long beards.
That's it.
Yeah.
You see that, turbans and long beards, but they're often mistaken as Muslims.
Let's point out that that's among the men, just to be clear.
Yes, that's among the men. So people will see that and say, Muslim.
Right.
No. This is a Sikhism, that actually came out of Hinduism, not Islam. Very important. Yeah.
A Sikh, did you mention that it means learner or disciple?
I didn't.
Okay. A Sikh, S-I-K-H, is a learner or a disciple, and they're disciples of the guru. That's just...
That's actually going to be a key concept here. There's gurus that they follow. And so they're called disciples or Sikhs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's beginning story. It's creation account.
Right.
So like Christianity, Sikhs believe in one God. They're monotheistic in that sense, the creator of all that exists.
Yeah. Different than what we just covered in Jainism.
Yes.
Like Christianity.
And most Eastern religions.
That's right.
Yeah.
Like Christianity, their God is timeless, self-existent, eternal, and spirit.
God created with complete love and is infinite in goodness. Right, we're seeing some pretty serious distinctions.
Right, which is why we're going to make a point later on that the British actually liked Sikhism.
Yes.
Because they could relate to some of these concepts.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the gods who are worshipped in other religions owe their existence to the one true God.
Yeah, that's what they would say.
Yes,
right.
They would say that.
The holiest of all their sacred rites is the repetition of the one true God's name for them.
No one knows how great God is because he can't be comprehended by the mind nor described inadequately. We talked about him being ineffable.
Yeah.
EFF.
Transcendent, beyond our understanding. We would agree with that. But unlike Christianity, their God never takes on human flesh as Jesus did.
Which is a humongous distinction between Christianity and everything else.
That's exactly right.
Everything else.
Yeah. Now, they do say humanity is naturally bent toward evil. We get that.
Agree.
But then they say, and so far you're like, well, this doesn't sound like Hinduism at all.
Right.
But here we go. Every human will die and be reborn countless times in samsara.
We're back to samsara and karma and
we're back to it.
Reincarnation kinds of things.
It comes out of a Hindu background.
Yeah.
So hopefully you're beginning to see these concepts and these categories.
Yeah. That's helpful because we are seeing patterns
Yep.
in some of these things. And just to be clear, when we say we're seeing patterns, we're not saying they're all the same.
No.
I'm not saying.
No, we're not saying.
I'm not saying that you would say that because you wouldn't say that. But
no,
nobody is saying the Venn diagram parts where there are similarities means they're all the same.
No, we're going to point out differences, uniquenesses.
Pushed into one big, huge, unified.
No.
It's not possible. Though there are lots of people who talk about that. Even like
and we'll get to that.
Educated PhD people with the history of religions.
Yeah. And the next one we're going to get to, the Baha'i faith.
Totally. That's exactly
says basically all religions are essentially the same.
Yeah.
Which they're not.
Yes.
So because of reincarnation, it's impossible for humanity to conceive of an initial stage of existence.
And we're in this creation.
Right. We're still in creation.
Yes.
So even though we said they believe in one God who's timeless, self-existent, the focus is not on our origins.
Right.
It's just on current existence.
And it's not a linear, has a point in time.
No. So that's where it breaks down with Christianity. It's different. So you're seeing some similarities, some differences.
Yeah. So historical origins.
Yes. All these are going to be about gurus. This is very important. All about gurus.
Okay.
So Guru Nanak lived from 1469 to 1539. And Sikhism originated as a movement with him to bridge Hinduism and Islam in the 15th century. Remember, just very briefly, Hinduism believes in many gods, reincarnation, karma,
countless gods,
image veneration, and moksha, liberation.
Moksha is liberation from samsara.
Right.
Yes.
Islam, on the other hand, very different than Hinduism, believes in one God, one earthly life, linear, no veneration of any images. So these are very distinct world faiths that are in conflict with each other.
And we can see that Sikhism is trying to...
It's trying to bridge that gap.
Yeah, for sure.
That's right.
The fringes of both religions just named, Hinduism, Islam, urged tolerance, but eventually a new religious movement here, Sikhism, emerged, and Guru Nanak was influenced by previous philosophers and influences, but is actually credited as being the official founder of these two, which I think is why Derek Cooper says, I can't remember what he categorized Jainism as. Anyway, Sikhism is a union thing.
Okay. So Guru Nanak practiced devotional Hinduism growing up, and he emphasized a personal relationship with God, which was unique.
Which is definitely unique.
He was born into the merchant caste system, the Khatri. That's the merchant's caste system. So he became a storekeeper, but he rejected the caste system.
Yeah.
He spent his free time composing hymns, helping the poor, following his meditations and rituals.
And at the age of 30...
Seeing a theme here.
Yes, we are, if you listen to the last episode. He was taking a daily ritual bath in a river, and he received a revelation from God. He disappeared for 3 days, but emerged from this baptism with a revelation from God. There is no Hindu, and there is no Muslim. And he says he was told by God to go into the world to pray and to teach mankind how to pray. Left his wife and children, because of course apparently that's what you are supposed to do if you receive a revelation from God. Being sarcastic, people, just in case you're unaware. Left his wife and children in obedience to the revelation, eventually settling down in Punjab. Founded the first Sikh community. Teaching God was reached through meditations on God's name, and that seeking union, not just with those two, but seeking union with God, was the goal. During his life, he composed 1,000 hymns that would later form the core of the scriptures, and before he died, he appointed another guru, a human guru, to succeed him and to continue teaching God's message.
Yeah, seeking union with God was the goal. You've mentioned union a couple times. That's the goal here. So he's the first
guru. So the
guru.
Sikhs seek union. Okay.
So he's the first guru. There were 9 succeeding gurus that came after him. We're not going to name all of them, but the next 4 were poets like him. We know when they lived and when they died. We have very specific years for them. So it's Angad Dev, Amar Das, Ram Das, Arjan Dev. Guru number 5 is Arjan. He's credited with collecting and codifying their scriptures, which is important, and constructing the first temple. He wrote even more hymns than the original Guru Nanak did. He was eventually tortured and killed in 1606.
Yeah.
6th Guru, also killed in 1644.
And this is significant-ish. Later on.
Yeah, jump to the 10th and the last of the human gurus, Guru Gobind Singh. Let's talk about him for a little bit.
He was also martyred.
Yeah, you don't want to be a guru.
No, you're going to be martyred.
Yeah.
But he definitely had an indelible and important lasting impact on Sikhism, most responsible for the turban, beard, clothing, accessories, formed a very select community called the Khalsa, Khalsa, the pure ones, kind of monkish, I suppose. They were baptized, they received new names, and they embraced a very strict code of conduct and adopted what are known as the 5 Ks that distinguished Sikhs from Hindus and Muslims.
Right. So
The 5 Ks.
You know, we're still in the history, but this sort of falls into their beliefs. The 5 Ks were important at the time because they gave them an identity, especially
as the Muslims were becoming a big deal.
Yes. So the 5 Ks are not words that you would know. We'll translate them. Kesh, Kanga, Kirpan, Kach, and Kara.
I know what a kirpan is.
Oh, you do?
Just for the record, I've heard the word kirpan.
Okay,
before.
so what are these 5 Ks?
The first one, Kesh, is uncut hair. Part of why they need a turban.
Right. Part of why they need a turban.
Maybe it's entirely why, I don't know. Kanga is comb.
Right.
Actually, I've known that one too.
Okay.
But anyway. Kirpan, Kirpan, is sword. The Kach,
I don't know how you say it.
Kachh, is underwear. There are some faiths that really put a strange emphasis on underwear. And the Kara is bangle.
Yes. So if you've seen them, men with lengthy hair, flowing beards, and turbans, they're not doing that for a fashion statement.
No, and also the bangles. And
Right. This is a statement of their faith, and it's a unifying feature to them.
Right.
But Dr. Cooper points out not all Sikh men wear the 5 Ks. And if they don't, they're still in good standing in the community if they ascribe to everything else. But nonetheless, this is how you can see them. It's their distinguishing feature.
Yeah. It's interesting that they have to externally, with material stuff, point out
Their uniquenesses.
Yes, my holiness. And so attempts at sovereignty. What are we trying to say with this part of this larger section of their historical origins?
Well, they actually formed armies at one point to defend their way of life. Remember, they're getting martyred all the time.
Yes, and that's what I meant when I was saying the martyr stuff becomes this militaristic thing.
Yeah. So you remember, they're in between Hindu and Muslim, and they're not really accepted by either one.
Right.
So they formed armies, but then the British, in the middle of all this, the British Empire takes over control of Punjab. The British ruled from the mid-1800s to the mid-1900s in Punjab. So during that 100 years, the Sikhs are trying to get independence. They're trying to get influence over their own religious sites, their politics, their language rights. And this is where I mentioned before, the British had a mixed relationship with the Sikhs. So on the one hand, they're trying to convert them. So they're encouraging Christian missions and institutes to convert the Sikh to Christianity.
Yeah.
But they did prefer the Sikhs over Hindus and Muslims because of some of those similarities we saw with the one God and who he is.
Sure.
So they preferred them. So Dr. Cooper points out, despite many attempts, Sikhs have never been able to create their own country. And after the British split up Punjab, they actually left for many other parts of the world. That's why you see many of them in the US, the UK, and Canada, because they've never been able to have their own country.
Yeah, they've attempted to be sovereign in terms of geopolitical entity, but...
And there's a lot of them, as you pointed out in the introduction.
Yeah, 25 million.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I think Jainism had 6
million. Right.
There are fewer Jews in the world.
That's right.
Than
6.
By a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that was all their historical origins, where they came from. So religious writings.
The Guru Sahib.
Right, so that's a book. The Guru Granth Sahib is actually a book. In fact, it is the world's most revered religious book. It is sacred to all Sikhs.
Yeah. And it's basically chronological, with the first Guru Nanak that we already mentioned was the first one mentioned. And it's called that Guru Granth Sahib because it is believed, the book is believed to be the embodiment of the gurus.
It's considered to be the final guru. It's the culmination in writing of all that the 10 human gurus taught.
Yeah.
So it is the primary focus in all Sikh temples, and it's treated with incredible care.
Would you say that it is for them, you've done more study about this than I, would you say for them this is a version of the canon is closed, Revelation is closed, it's the word not made flesh.
Almost.
But it's like that.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, yes, it's incredibly revered.
It's embodiment of the
Only certain
word.
people can touch it. Like it's kept under cloth. It's protected. It's incredible what they do. It's the central focus of everything. And so it's called the current guru. It's just the written guru.
I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I like it too.
That way of talking about it.
And by the way, it's huge. It has roughly 1,500 pages in modern print volumes. So it's big.
Our Bibles have every bit of that, depending on the size of
big print, little
font.
print. Yeah.
And my Bibles increasingly have more pages than that,
that's
as
right.
it turns out. The words are obviously sacred, so they're timeless, as they believe. It contains very few historical events. That's interesting.
Mainly poetry that's meant to be sung.
Yeah. The Bible has tons more historical events.
Oh, yes.
Than your typical religious writing, for what it's worth. Yeah.
Developed over time, like most religious books, but the title calling it guru was only applied to it after the last human guru, the 10th one, Gobind Singh, died in 1708. And so before that, and a common name for it, in the original version, it was just called the Adi Granth, which is the first book, or AG. That's what it was called.
And that doesn't mean Assembly of God.
No. Each of the first 5 gurus helped with the composition, transmission, compilation, and dissemination of this book. But as I pointed out earlier, it was the 5th guru, Arjan, in 1604, who created the first written version, and he placed it in the Golden Temple in Amritsar, India.
Is it still there?
It is still there. And it is known as the Kartarpur Poti, and it remains in the temple today. But why is it called a guru? Why isn't it just called a holy book?
Yeah.
Well, it was that 10th guru, Gobind Singh, his dying words were, as they're thinking about who comes after you.
Whoever wishes to hear the guru's words should wholeheartedly read the Granth or listen to it being read.
So they took him seriously. And from then on, the book became known as the Guru. So, and his words, by the way, his authorship is disputed, even though he wrote some things. So his words are deuterocanonical. They're respected, but we're not sure. But those first 5 gurus that wrote, and that's contained in that book, that is the holy book.
That's sort of like the opposite of the typical way that a cult becomes a more mainstream thing in this small way. I'm going to write this book, and I'm going to say, you must read this, and this is the sacred revelation. And I'm one person, right?
Yeah.
There were corroborations.
Sure.
There were others who corroborated
Right.
and were part of it before. So it's not as clear as I'm saying it, but as opposed to the scriptures, which has
many authors and
and is corroborated in a whole bunch of other ways.
Yeah. So they call the Guru Granth Sahib, remember that's the book,
Yeah.
the living embodiment.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, they believe it to be the living incarnation of the gurus. It demands respect. And so this is what I was telling you, Scott. Dr. Cooper points out it can only be handled by someone trusted with the responsibility of honoring, preserving, and guarding it.
And by that, I assume they mean, obviously they mean the ideas therein, but everybody has access to the ideas.
Well, it's taught and read to everyone.
Right.
But they mean the actual...
Which was the last dying wishes, whatever. But they are actually talking about the book itself in
literal
material terms.
Yeah, it's the focal point in all their temples. It's stored under elegant fabric or on a cushioned stand. And while it's being read, an attendant will fan a brush above it. Like in the ancient air conditioning to keep it from getting moisture. They still do it to this day, even in air-conditioned temples. It's just, you must do this to the pages of the book. And it's lovingly cared for, including putting it to bed tenderly in the evening.
Now we have gone full on into idol worship.
Yeah, it's
I was thinking this,
it's
and I was
something.
going to say something earlier, but I thought,
Yeah, well, when we get to the religious practices, you'll see it more.
Yeah.
So let's talk about beliefs.
Beliefs in overall terms, then we'll talk about God, 3 pillars, and ecumenical,
Right.
as it relates to other faiths. So overall, Sikhism includes beliefs that agree partly with Hinduism, samsara, karma, and partly with Islam, one God.
But they have their own scriptures, beliefs, practices, and community. So they're committed to 4 distinct things, which are
Belief in the existence of one God, adherence to the Guru Granth Sahib,
the book,
which is the book, and 10 preceding human gurus. That's still number 2. Acceptance of the baptism that was taught by the 10th guru, and allegiance to no other religion.
Okay. So regarding God, we mentioned briefly before, he's timeless, he's formless, he possesses all attributes and yet transcends all of them. The original guru, Nanak, said about him, there is one God, eternal truth is his name. It is not through thought that he is to be comprehended. So we would agree that there is one God, eternal truth is his name. Okay, we'll go along with that.
Sure, I am.
But we are to meditate on him deeply and extensively.
Yeah, right.
So the
The
goal...
fact that he's ineffable
Yeah.
doesn't mean we don't
work hard.
F.
Yeah, that's right. But Scott has said this many times. The goal of Sikhism is not to try to understand God, but to join God, union with God, which, by the way, is yoga.
Yoga with God.
Go back to Hinduism, where we taught about some of the dangers with yoga today.
Yeah.
It means union with God.
So the 3 pillars are meditating on God by means of the Guru Granth, which again is the book.
The book.
Having a morally respectable job.
Remember, they're high in society.
And taking care of others.
Yes. But they're also ecumenical. They do not try generally to convert others.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
They teach all people are equal, have the same value.
Sure.
They're very generous and hospitable people.
Great.
They do believe all people have the ability to choose right from wrong.
Okay.
And now, interestingly, they believe God will save people based on his divine grace, not religious affiliation. They throw grace in there.
It's a strange grace.
I was reading this, I'm like, grace?
Yeah.
But it's an interesting grace.
Most people continue in the seemingly eternal cycle of birth, life, and death, samsara. Therefore, multiple faiths are respected and acceptable for others to practice. And in Sikhism, there are no diversions between clergy and lay people.
It's an interesting combination of, they mention grace, but it's still about death, birth, relife, samsara, endless cycle.
Which, in a sense, makes sense. Hinduism, one transcendent God, let's just say, and you can't know him. He's ineffable. He's not like us.
Which is why you end up worshiping 300 million gods.
And yet, samsara, karma, Buddhism, other ideas like that. It is trying to say both of those.
It's trying to do both.
Because you don't get to this God without his grace.
Yeah.
You can't in that sense.
Yeah.
And yet, you have to somehow get out of that cycle yourself by doing the good. And yeah.
Yeah, they're trying to bridge multiple ones here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little like, in a number of ways, you're like, oh, you're getting there.
Yeah.
Kind of.
And you can see why the British sort of liked them.
Yeah.
But
worship practices, personal piety, corporate devotion.
Yep. So like many of these, they rise early in the morning, but for them it's to bathe and sing from portions of the book Guru Granth.
And then they do that in the evening.
Right. In the evening, they sing hymns.
And they ceremonially close it.
Right. Remember, it's so sacred.
And they put it on a pillow and they waft. No. Corporate devotion, they have temples where they sit in the presence of the Guru Granth Sahib, which again is the book. They sit in the presence of the book.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating. Public playing of musical instruments, as your notes say, done with great delight.
That's what he says. He says this is actually a joyful thing.
It's interesting. The scripture is read by an attendant, but there is no ordained cleric to lead. The service ends with prayers and the distribution of sweetened dough.
Yeah, this is interesting. There's sweetened dough given to everyone in attendance at the end of the service. And Dr. Cooper is going to make a point about that. But we'll get back to that. So this food, by the way, he says, he's taken students because he's a seminary professor. He's taken students to these Sikh temples.
Yeah.
And he says the students look at him when the sweetened dough is being offered, and they think in terms of communion, like, should we take this, should we not? And he points out, he says he always takes it because for the Sikh community, it doesn't mean you agree. It's about friendliness and commonality. It's offered to everyone in attendance, whether they agree or not. Remember, they're very generous, hospitable people. He loves the Sikh people. They're very kind people. And so he tells his students, just take it. It doesn't mean you're agreeing with everything they teach.
Right.
They're just kind people.
Right.
And then following that,
interestingly,
there's a communal meal, which similarly is open to everyone, regardless of their caste system or faith. It's open to everyone. So he loves taking students to experience these things.
I think we should start passing out sweetened dough at the end of our services. Points of contact.
All right, so similarities and differences with Christianity.
Yes, they have much in common, as we've talked about. Belief in one true, limitless creator God, high morals, ethics, and lifestyles, treatment of all people with equal dignity and value, hospitality and generosity, and a high view of the sacred writings.
Also, they're the first group we've come across that teaches, at least formally in practice, in word, God's grace. They believe God's grace will save them. And he points out, Dr. Cooper points out, the sweet bread represents this. That's what it represents, God's grace that will save you. Well, we as Christians believe God's grace will save us too. And communion for us is a picture or reflection of how God's grace is extended to us. So he says this is a jumping off point with Sikhs that you can talk about. But there, of course, are key differences.
Yeah. They have a very different view of when life ends.
Yes.
And what happens then.
Yeah.
Despite their faith in God and his grace, Sikhs are stuck in the never-ending cycle of samsara.
Yeah, so you talk about God's grace, but you're just going to keep being reborn into this samsara thing over and over and over.
Right.
So whereas we would say,
grace take you out of that?
Yeah, that's right.
When the whole system is you getting yourself out of that.
Yeah. So Dr. Cooper points out, and I agree, there's a key difference here. A Christian's faith in God and his grace is not just a general idea of grace. It is localized in the person of Jesus Christ.
It's almost like they understand that grace, it has to be grace. You can't get out of this thing.
That's right. They get the concept that grace is needed, but it's not focalized anywhere. It's not localized. It's not focused anywhere.
Right. Focalized. We should start
I made up a new word.
It's a focal point. It's localized. It's a focalized
Let's go with
thing.
that. The locus is Jesus himself, right? So there's some key scriptures here we'll just end with.
There has to be someone or something that does the thing.
If you can't do it.
Because
if you're stuck in it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's point out just some scriptures where God says, yes, there's grace, but I've done it for you.
Yes, and fully God, fully man is the necessary component.
That's right.
Galatians 4:3-7. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world.
So far we're in agreement.
Yes. And we might say that's the parallel there is to the samsara.
Right. Sure.
Cycle.
We'll go that far.
But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of woman, born under the law.
So God takes human flesh.
Yes. To redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons.
To free them from samsara.
And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God.
There's where Christ, the Son, has liberated us from that bondage.
Yeah. Because an external source has to be the thing.
Yeah.
Hebrews 2:14-15. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery.
We can't get much more clear than that. We are delivered from death, from the fear of death.
Yeah. 2 Corinthians 5:1-8. For we know that if the tent that is our earthly home is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this tent we groan, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling, if indeed by putting it on we may not be found naked. For while we are still in this tent, we groan, being burdened, not that we would be unclothed, but that we would be further clothed, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. He who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who has given us the Spirit as a guarantee. So we are always of good courage. We know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. Yes, we are of good courage, and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord.
Yeah, Paul lived with this hope, knowing that, I'm this tent that I live in, this earthly tent, this body, I groan and I'm burdened. But I look forward to one day when I'm away from this body and at home with the Lord.
A building from God, a house not made with hands, that's eternal in the heavens.
Right. I'll be in his presence, and one day with a resurrected body. The mortal takes on immortality. Death is swallowed up by life. And that's the hope that we live with as Christians, because we have one who achieved for us by God's grace what we could not.
Yes, because he was born under the law, and yet not enslaved to it because he overcame it by his righteousness.
So I don't know how many Sikhs you will encounter in your life or have an opportunity to talk to, but one of our prayers is that as you hear this and read and understand the differences, you come to appreciate more what God has done for you by his grace in the person of his eternal Son, Jesus Christ, how it does not depend on you, but it depends on him. And therefore your confidence can be secure. And therefore you can have the peace and the joy and the hope that Paul lived with. And he said, it is God who has made us for this very purpose. And that, to me, strengthens my faith and encourages me, but it also gives me a compassion for those who are stuck in a worldview and a religious system that while there may be the idea of hope, it's almost impossible to attain, even as they admit.
Yeah, for sure. It's like a hope of hope.
Yeah.
But it's still actually hopeless.
Right.
Because there's not an actual mechanism for the righteousness that extends grace.
So perhaps next time you take communion, remember it is God's grace that has done it all for you. Not a nebulous grace, but a grace in the person of Jesus Christ.
Fully God, fully man.
Yeah.
Yep. Good stuff.